I spoke to Senior Regional Advisor at the Institute for Security Studies, Dr. Paul Simon Handy. I began our conversation by asking him if the elections in the Central African Republic would be safe this weekend, given the high levels of unrest in the build-up to the polls.
To be completely honest, nobody knows, and we are very justified in having serious doubts about the safety of the election, safety of the organizers, safety of the candidates, and the safety of the voters. Reports coming out of the country indicate that armed groups are actually controlling vast portions of the territory and do not seem to want the votes to go on as planned. Just like many opposition parties do not want to risk their lives for this election. But on the other side, the government and its allies want this election to take place, which raises questions about the legitimacy of the government that will come out of these elections.
If one looks at the history of Central African Republic from independence, it's been turbulent most of the time. Coups, counter-coups, military rule, civilian rule, and rebel groups seem to have been a key narrative throughout the course of the country's history. How do we describe the current situation in the country? Who's in charge of what? What are the driving forces of power? It's quite hard to understand for someone like me from the outside looking in.
Even for somebody who claims to be an expert of the country, it is a difficult situation. We have these repeated cycles of coups, of insecurity, of instability, which have been going on for more than 30 years now, and the country doesn't seem to find the right fit. But we have a government in charge. We also have a peace agreement that was signed 2 years ago. It's going to be celebrating the second anniversary in February. So, but we don't have peace, although we have a peacekeeping mission. But we can say there's no peace to keep right now. But having said that, although the situation is confused, we've had a lot of progress in recent years, but the concretization of this progress hasn't happened yet. And these elections were actually planned to actually consolidate the semblance of peace that we've had in the country for the last 2 years. But it's visibly not the case. And as usual, the problems are more political in nature than anything else. The violence that we see, the movements of armed groups is more the consequence of political troubles, political misunderstandings that are actually that are manifested and expressed in a violent way. So to fix it, a political solution will have to be found with the support of neighboring countries.
How popular and legitimate, maybe even, is the current president, Faustin Archange Touadéra? And what are his chances at the polls this weekend in a free and fair election?
It's difficult to tell. What we know is that being an incumbent is generally quite an asset in African countries, in African elections, for various reasons. And one of the reasons is definitely that an incumbent can sometimes get the advantage of or benefit from the means of the state, as weak as the state can be. So the incumbent is present all over the country, which the opposition is generally not necessary. So his chances, he stands serious chances to be re-elected, but it's extremely difficult to say because he hasn't really been challenged seriously, and these elections are taking place in a time of in a very difficult time. Security situation is not appeased, so we can't say, even if he wins, we can't say that we can't ensure that this election will be free and fair and transparent, actually.
Earlier, you spoke about the need for a political solution in the country, and that the country would need the help of its neighbors. Let's talk a little bit about international involvement. We'll talk about the great Western and European powers just now, but let's start locally, because over time, a lot of the neighbors have been involved one way or another. I'm thinking about even DRC, Uganda, Lord's Resistance Army, and Rwanda. And recently we're seeing Rwanda sending troops actually into the country. Tell us about the involvement of African nations in the CAR and what that might mean going forward, particularly as we see, as I said, Rwandan troops on the ground.
Yes, you're right. Neighbors, particularly countries, member states of the Economic Community of Central African State, ECAS, have been very, very much involved in finding a solution to the crisis to the multiple crises in the CAR. So the involvement dates back several years ago, and it has been multidimensional. It has been financial, it has been technical, it has been military. So the neighbors have been quite involved. Engagement has also been political, by the way, with mediators from the region and so on. And before the UN peace operation actually came into the country, there was a regional peace operation by ECAS that was now whose troops were actually transferred into the UN mission. So countries in the region have been very much involved, and although many of them have left the UN peace operation, which you still have a country like Cameroon with troops in MINUSCA, and of course Rwanda, who's also part of the Economic Community of Central African Republic. And Rwanda is quite an interesting case because Rwanda has been there for quite a long time now, but recently there have been reports of Rwanda sending troops officially to support their peacekeeping troops who are present in the country. But there are also unconfirmed reports saying that these additional troops are not necessarily within the framework of the peace operation, but rather within the framework of a bilateral agreement between Rwanda and the CAR. But you also have a country like Chad in the north, who has been extremely important for stability in the country. And Chad is, at the moment, the only country of the region who has officially expressed its concern about the situation in the CAR, and who's calling for a mediation of both the region and the UN to stabilize the country. So yes, the CAR, the neighbors of the CAR are quite concerned about what's going on, and because it directly affects their own stability.
All right, let's move further afield now. Given the history of the country, French involvement, not unusual. I believe they've sent warplanes to fly over Central African Republic as these elections come to the fore. But I'm surprised to hear about Russia sending in some troops there as well. Explain that to us.
Russia's involvement in the CAR is relatively recent. It dates back maybe 4 years ago, and was surprising even for a rather traditional partner of the CAR like France. But since then, Russia has been quite present within the security and defense field, has actually taken quite some space in the close protection of the president, and of course also in supporting the Central African Republic's army with weapons, with ammunition, and with trainers. So, and recently, after the rebels actually tried to seize some towns, Russia also officially sent not some troops, according to the official statements, but rather some trainers, some additional trainers. So a total number of 300 trainers officially, although there are also unconfirmed reports saying that there are also arms and ammunition that Russia is providing to the CAR. So what happens is that there's a lack of transparency of the type and the nature and the magnitude of support the CAR is getting from its ally, which could actually turn quite negative. The country's army has a history of actually not being able to keep its arms and ammunition. Rebels have generally actually been able to seize those arms and actually to use them against the same army. And we know that recently Russia has actually provided the country's army with some heavy transport machine, and at least one of them has actually been seized by rebels. So that's one of the reasons why the arms embargo that has been actually imposed to the country is still valid, is still important despite the negations from the government side.
All right, perhaps finally, the 27th, that's when the elections will take place. There will be a president announced in the coming days after that. Is this going to be just another moment in time, or might this be a significant shifting of the sands in terms of the country's fortunes going forward? What are your thoughts?
The prospects are not good. I'm sorry to say that, but the prospects are complex, not necessarily positive. But I was saying that I really hope that I will be proven wrong. But the prospects are definitely not good. This election, as I see it going, might not necessarily be the major event we thought it would be. Its legitimacy is questioned. We're not sure how many opposition leaders are going to contest it. And even if they decide to do, is the security situation going to allow a real turnout of the population? Is participation going to be high enough for results to be legitimate? So there are many questions. We see that government and the UN, the international community in general, want this election to happen. But it seems that they want this election for the sake of elections, not necessarily for the sake of actually renewing the legitimacy of the incumbent government. So, and if the legitimacy of the government is questioned, then we might ask ourselves, what is the fate of the peace agreement after those elections? And what does it say about the capacity of these government security apparatus to keep the country's safety? I mean, we see a government that is not able to face non-state armed groups without the help of the UN and of its allies, specifically of Russia and Rwanda. What does it mean actually for the country's stability? So the prospects are actually not very positive.